Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Bee and today I'm going to be doing my April and my May wrap up together. I don't know why I didn't do an April wrap up, but I'm just going to combine the two. Some statistics for this month because I like to see those things. I don't know why. I read 8 books in April and I read approximately 3,711 pages. That's approximate. I just get those totals off of the correct edition on Goodreads. I did have a TBR from my TBR jar this month and I picked 6 books out of that TBR jar. Out of that jar, I read 2, I DNF'd 2, and I didn't read 2 other ones, but I added them back to the TBR jar, and one of them I actually ended up reading in May. We're gonna start with the 2 I did not finish. The 2 I did not finish was Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater and Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Both of those are soft DNFs that I am gonna go back to. It's just in the moment I wasn't in the mood for them. First book from my TBR jar picks, take a shot for every time I say TBR in this video, honestly. Vampires of El Norte by Isabel Cañas. I don't have the physical copy with me right now, and a lot of these books I won't because I have already packed them away because I'm moving and I have to have all my stuff packed and out of this apartment in 3 weeks. This book primarily focuses on Nina and Nestor and their enemies to lovers romance. It is set in 1840s Mexico, and I was craving something that was a little bit more like gothic horror when I picked up this book, and I actually went into a whole likes and dislikes on my Goodreads about this one, but just getting back to the plot, basically when they were younger, Nestor and Nina are like soulmates. They're constantly together, and one day they are out by the river and Nina is attacked by a creature. Nestor gets blamed for it and banished from the ranch he was helping on, or like the town, and he runs away. Years later, he has to return to the village where Nina is, and she thinks that he just abandoned her, and it's like a big miscommunication thing. I hate miscommunication. I feel like that's like a universal thing, but for some reason in this book, it made sense that there was a miscommunication thing because it wasn't really between them. It was between the adults that like kicked Nestor out of the village. When they're adults, Nestor comes back and everything is as normal. There are tensions between white colonizers from the north, and this is set in like the Texas-Mexico border kind of area, and I don't know at this time in 1840 if Texas was actually a state yet. It was Mexico, so I don't really know the history of that area, but this book did kind of touch on that, which was really interesting, and those tensions, like I said, between the white colonizers and the people that were native to this area. And then there's also the creatures that are feeding and like leaving husk versions of humans after they feed on them, and of course these are vampires. I have never read vampires like these before. I felt like they were done really cool, like they're very eerie, kind of, you know, vampires coming into the territory and being a threat also kind of symbolizes what the white colonizers were doing, so there was a little bit of symbolism there. That's basically it, and Nina and Nestor and their love story amongst this like kind of turbulent environment that they live in. I talked about the things that I liked. Some things I felt a little let down by was 1840s Mexico would have been such a cool setting if we actually got to hear about more of it, and we didn't. It was very weak on the scenic descriptions, I thought, and I just wanted more of that landscape. That's why I like reading kind of Western themed like westerns. I also felt like the pacing was strange. For a big portion of the book, they're like on a journey, and it's kind of like, I understand why they were on a journey, but it just didn't end up being as impactful as I thought it was. I would recommend it definitely in the fall. I think I ended up giving Vampires of El Norte a 3.5. Book I do have a physical copy of still, and it is She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. I talked about this book in this video in depth, so I won't go into it. I don't want to be repetitive with it, but basically it is about a girl who lives in a rural village in China, ancient China, and all of her family dies, and she decides to take her brother's identity, and you follow her path. And it is more than that. This book has a lot of conversations about gender identity, sexual preferences. I really loved it because of that. I wasn't expecting that to be such a major topic in it, and I was really like happily surprised by that, and I really enjoyed it. In the background of this, you have a Mongolian dynasty that is trying to take over or hold control over China, and then you have, specifically, it focuses on a rebel group called the Red Turbans that are trying to fight the Mongolian rule, and so that is a big portion of this book is that conflict between those two and who was going to end up having control over China. There is a fantasy element of this, which there's supposed to be like a prophet that's called the Prince of Radiance, and throughout the book different characters do develop like different powers that kind of mimic this, and it kind of goes into religious leadership and what that looks like, and tyrannical leaders. It's very heavy in politics. I found myself attached to every single character that was in this book, even if they were doing not great things, because I felt like at the core of a lot of these people, they're very broken and you understand why they are the way that they are. So yeah, I really enjoy this historical fantasy. Like I said, I talk about it more in depth in the other videos, so that's all I'm gonna say about it. But I gave this a 4.75. The next book I don't have the physical copy of. I read the physical copy, but it is currently packed up for moving, and it is Age of Swords by Michael J. Sullivan. This is book 2 of the Legends of the First Empire series. It's part of a greater overarching series that all takes place in the same world, and this is chronologically in like timeline order. This series is the first one of all those different series, even though it was written, it wasn't the first one he wrote. But this series, like an epic fantasy, it's pretty easy to read. There are a lot of characters. Not really gonna go much into the plot of this one because, like I said, it is the second in a series of 6 books. I really liked this one because it is about a group of women who are just badass, and they go to like the goblin world to try to make a deal, help them prepare for the impending war that is gonna come in this series. And that's about all I can tell you. Just like the first book, it focuses a lot on human advancements. So in the series so far, they've like discovered how to make barrels and carts and bow and arrows and better swords and stuff like that. So you're really seeing like an ancient civilization work through developing these things. And one thing I really loved was one of the characters in this book develops a written language, and it kind of mimics cave drawings. She has other people come over and she's like, can you tell what this says? And they're like, yeah. They could like tell what story it says, and the narrator says like, and from that moment they knew nothing would ever be the same. And as a lover of words, a reader and a writer, that hit really hard for me. Like that kind of brought a tear to my eye, so that was like a really cool moment. This book is really a journey. I'm excited to get the 3rd book and continue on with the series. I gave this one a 4-star. So the next book I also do not have a physical copy of. I read this on Libby as an ebook, and it is called The Grace of Wild Things by Heather Fawcett, who, as you may recognize, is the author of Emily Wilde. This one was so cute. It was a reimagining and fantastical reimagining of Anne of Green Gables, and it's basically about this child witch who is in an orphanage. She escapes the orphanage and she stumbles upon a witch's cabin in the woods. She's heard rumors about where this witch like eats children. Like it's not gruesome. That sounded like scary. It's not like Grimm's fairy tales. It's very fantastical and silly, goofy. So her name is Grace, and she wants to learn from this witch how to better her skills with her spells and potions and such, and she's never felt like she's belonged anywhere because she was the only witch in her orphanage, and she felt like a weirdo basically. And the witch is supposed to be like this wicked witch, you know, who's just like evil and whatever. She lets Grace stay there only if Grace can learn 150 spells out of the witch's grimoire over the course of a year. At the end of that year, if Grace does not learn those spells, the witch can take her magic, which will make the witch younger. It's kind of like hocus pocus. That's honestly how I describe it. I also really loved the found family. As Grace is doing these spells, she enlists her new schoolmates to help, and it's just really sweet. There's a little fae boy that helps her sometimes. It was just really sweet, and it was about found family and belonging and doing what you love, and Grace was a really cute and wholesome character to follow. And I ended up giving this book 3.75. The next book I read is King of Battle and Blood by Scarlett St. Clair. This was basically like an enemies to lovers vampire fantasy romance book. Our main character, Isolde, I'm probably saying that so wrong. She is a princess in her kingdom, and she gets married to Adrian, who is the king of the vampires, who are deemed to be evil and are the cause of all the plagues. And as she is traveling with them, she kind of realized nothing is as it seems in the history of how they became vampires and what she's always been taught. I had some major issues with this book, and I will probably continue the series. Like I read this in like one day. I'm pretty sure it was such a fast read. My issues were, it was very predictable. All the twists which in a way was comforting, but in another way I was like, dang, I just wanted more. I wanted more from this. There was so much spice in this book, and I'm a smut reader. Like, I'll read smut of any kind. This book, it would just be like spice scene after spice scene. They barely knew each other and were just like, oh, we're so attracted to one another for some reason, like, oh, what could it be? And they end up hooking up even though the next day they hate each other. It's really off-putting. And that's from someone who likes to read spice. I think it's fun. I have a good time with it. I give this one a 3 stars, my least favorite of April. This book I read is The Villa by Rachel Hawkins. It's a dual timeline thriller about a murder. It takes place at this villa, obviously, in 1974, and it follows this group of musicians and kind of artists at that time that are really, you know, sex, drugs, rock and roll. That's what we're doing in 1974 at this villa, and a murder takes place. Years later, Emily and her friend go to this villa for a vacation. They're both writers, and there's some like unsaid competition and animosity between them that's really uncomfortable to read. Like that, I'm like, did you guys even like each other? Inspired by Fleetwood Mac, the Manson murders, and the infamous summer Percy and Mary Shelley spent at Lord Byron and Lake Geneva Castle, the birthplace of Frankenstein, Rachel Hawkins, The Villa invites you into its deadly legacy. There you go. Emily in present day trying to figure out the real story of the murder that took place in 1974. 3.75. Yeah, it was okay. It had a good like at what cost type feeling for it. Haven't read a thriller in a while. Last 2 books were part of this vlog, so again, I'm not gonna go super in depth with them. Happy Place by Emily Henry. I cried. If you watch that video, you'll see me cry a lot, actually. A lot of tears were shed in the making of this video. Loved the friend group in this. I loved the setting. Really felt like I knew all the characters by the end of it. It was very emotional, and I loved the fact that it's about 2 main characters in this friend group who have always been like the golden couple of their friend group, and all 6 friends are back together again at this beach house in Maine, and those 2 main characters, Harriet and Wynne, haven't told anybody else that they actually broke up 8 months ago, and they're just there to keep the peace and make sure the friend group has a good last summer trip at this beach house. And the fake dating was so good. It was my first Emily Henry book. I want to dive into all of her books right now. I loved how she wrote relationships, the complexity within romance and friendship and family and personal identity, how to stay yourself and follow your own dreams and be your own person, amongst all 3 of those being pressure points. I talked a lot about life changes and purpose at a time where I was having like job transitions and packing to move out of this apartment I've been in. So it just like hit hard for me. I gave it a 4.5. I highly recommend this, and I'm excited to read more of Emily Henry. And last but not least, it would be a disservice to this book not to sit and talk about it for 45 minutes straight, but I can't. It is Kingdom of Ash by Sarah J. Maas. Wow. Cried 40 times while reading this book. It was relief tears, it was full circle moments, characters coming out of the woodwork, vengeance, karma coming in. No, just vengeance. Absolutely fell in love with Dorian by the end of this book. I can't really say like literally anything about this book because it's the last book in a 7-book series, technically 8 because there's a book of novellas. I read it in the order where I read the first 2 books in the series, and then I read the prequels third, and then I continued on with the series. Or you could read it first and then go into Throne of Glass. Either way, I think it would make sense. So whatever you do, read Assassin's Blade either first or third, whichever one is gonna be your preference. Just don't read it any other time than those 2. Blew my mind. I gave it 5 stars because I gave the whole series 5 stars. It's a 5-star series. And that is all of April. Have you grabbed a cup of tea, a cup of coffee, a water, a snack? Because we're getting into May now. I read 8 books in May, and this month is really funny to me because there's definitely a pattern seasonally with my reading, and it was definitely exposed this month. Some statistics, I already said I read 8 books. I read approximately 3,449 pages this month. I started off this month in a fantasy mood because we were coming out of the end of April. Still cool outside, but it wasn't quite 80-degree weather yet. I was in the mood for fantasy at the beginning of this month because I'm primarily a fantasy reader. And then as the month progressed, some things happened with my reading taste, and we'll get into that when the shift happens. But the first book I read in May was The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. This book changed my life. I'm not kidding. I'm not being dramatic. This is a new favorite. This is a 6-star read for me. It's going on my all-time favorites list. Blew me away, and I got it from the TBR jar. My TBR jar said to read this. This is far beneath the surface of the earth upon the shores of the starless sea. There is a labyrinth collection of tunnels and rooms filled with stories. The entryways that lead to this sanctuary are often hidden, but those who seek will find. The doors have been waiting for them. Zachary Ezra Rollins is searching for his door, though he does not know it. When he discovers a mysterious book in the stacks of his campus library, he begins to read and is entranced. Suddenly, a turn of the page brings Zachary to a story from his own childhood. A bee, a key, and a sword emblazoned on the book leads Zachary to two people who will change the course of his life. Mirabelle, a fierce pink-haired painter, and Dorian, a handsome barefoot man with shifting alliances. Amid twisting tunnels filled with books, gilded ballrooms, and wine-dark shores, Zachary falls into an intoxicating world soaked in romance and mystery. But a battle is raging over the fate of this place, and though there are those who would willingly sacrifice everything to protect it, there are just as many intent on its destruction. As Zachary, Mirabelle, and Dorian venture deeper into its space and its histories and myths, searching for answers in one another, a timeless story unspools, casting a spell of pirates, painters, lovers, liars, and ships that sail upon the starless sea. And that is literally what you need to know. There's the overall feeling of what is this world and who are these people, and it is slightly confusing at times because there are different sections throughout this book where it is referencing texts that Zachary and others are actually reading. So you'll switch from the timeline with Zachary and these other characters mentioned to different texts of books and different stories, and as the book progresses you figure out why those stories are important and what they actually mean, and it just blew me away. I feel like all of us as readers love stories, and what they mean in this book is entirely an ode to stories and story writing and words, and just, oh my gosh, 6 stars. That's all I gotta say. I would recommend this book to literally anybody. The next book I read is The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. I loved Madeline Miller's book Circe. I also have a love and obsession with Greek mythology, and I couldn't believe I hadn't read this. This was also out of my TBR jar, and so I was very excited. This book was a little bit of a letdown compared to Circe for me. I felt like it wasn't as beautifully written. The story was really well done. It's a retelling of the love between Patroclus and Achilles and their myth. Achilles has always been strong and gifted. His mother is a nymph, is gifted by the gods as like this warrior that's supposed to have a prophecy. And Patroclus is not gifted in any way, but he is banished from his kingdom and lives with Achilles. Achilles is a little bit insufferable at moments, but you have to think they're literal teenagers. Like, they're going to be insufferable. It doesn't matter if they're in a myth or not. They are like 17 at the end of this book, I believe, 17 or 18. It involves, the Trojan War and their kind of forbidden love for one another, and I liked it a lot. I gave it 3.75. The next book I read is Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson. This is a standalone fantasy. All sorcerers are evil. Elizabeth has known that as long as she's known anything. Raised as a foundling in one of Ostamir's great libraries, Elizabeth has grown up among magical grimoires that rattle beneath iron chains, capable of transforming into grotesque monsters. When an act of sabotage releases the library's most dangerous grimoire, Elizabeth is accused of treason. With no one to turn to but her sworn enemy, the sorcerer Nathaniel Thorne, and his mysterious servant, she finds herself entangled in a centuries-old conspiracy. Not only could the great libraries go up in flames, but the world along with them. There is a romance. There is little to no spice in this. If you're not into spice, this is a safe one for you. I thought it was a little bit predictable. It kind of read like a YA, kind of didn't. I really loved the description inside the libraries. It was very rich in detail about what the books, the grimoires that are full of magic looked like and smelled like. This book really appealed to the senses, and I gave this a 3.75 as well. I read The New Life by Tom Crew, and this is about two different men, John and Henry, as they work together in 1894 in Great Britain on a book that defends homosexuality, and in Great Britain at this time it was illegal. Each of the men respectively are married to women, and it explores all of the main characters' sexuality, their growth. John is married to Catherine. John is very much a gay man. He is attracted to a man named Frank, and it goes through his identity and his struggles as someone known he was gay for a while, who had to get married and have kids and do the societal expectations. Working, like I said, with Henry on a book. Henry is married to Edith, and each of them have respective different sexual identities, and their marriage is more of like a marriage of convenience. During the time that they are working on their book, they're very excited to write this and bring awareness to the normality of being gay. Oscar Wilde, who is a gay icon, during this time, he was alive during this time, gets arrested towards the end of the development of their book, and they have to decide whether they are still going to publish it because they feel like it is the right thing, or if they need to protect themselves from the law and the society that against homosexuality. The society obviously is very homophobic. It says, a powerful, visceral novel about love, sex, and social progress. The new life asks what each of us must sacrifice to make a better world. And that's entirely what the book is about. And I really enjoyed it. I hadn't read a historical fiction in a second, and I gave it a 4. We're at the point where my reading taste started to change because the weather was getting so warm and so summer-like outside. But like most people, it got warm, and all I wanted was a romance. The first one being Icebreaker by Hannah Grace. It is a hockey romance. Nate and Anastasia. Anastasia is a figure skater, and they go to the same college. Something happens where one of the rinks, the ice rinks, is damaged, and so they have to share an ice rink, and it makes both the ice skaters and the hockey players resentful towards one another, including our main characters, Nate and Anastasia. It's really cute. I liked it a lot. Although it was a little silly at times, I loved the friend group. I loved the mixed media part of it, where there were text messages. All the things you've heard about this book are probably true. It does have spice in it, spice that would make someone uncomfortable if they are a non-spice enjoyer. That's about all I can say about this one. I really liked it. It really surprised me, and I'm really glad I read it. It was a perfect way to kick off like the summer reading mood for me. I forgot to say I gave it a 3.75, which is not a bad rating. That's pretty much the average for this month, and technically the strongest writing in a book I've ever read. But did I enjoy it? Yes. And sometimes you can just rate a book based on how much you enjoy it, not its literary merit. Terms and Conditions by Lauren Asher. This is book 2 in the Dreamland Billionaires series. It's a series that follows 3 different brothers whose family runs Dreamland, which is like the equivalent of Disneyland. This follows one of the brothers, the oldest brother named Declan, and he wants to be the CEO of Dreamland. Their grandpa has passed, and they have been given tasks and accomplishments they have to do in order to receive their inheritance. Declan gets the weirdest one of all, and it's like borderline creepy. He has to get married and have a child. And there's like a whole reason to this in the letter that the grandpa wrote to him. So this one I was like iffy about going into it. It was my least favorite of May, I believe. This is about Declan and Iris. Iris is his assistant, and Declan is terrible when it comes to dating and can't find anyone to be his future bride slash mother of his children. So Iris, his assistant, steps up and takes on that role, and it's about them kind of discovering their attraction for one another and working through their individual goals. And it was silly, just like the first one, but I read it in maybe one afternoon, and it's just like a palate cleanser. I gave it a 3.5. So this is me getting into my literary fiction, returning to my roots era. I read Cleopatra and Frankenstein by Coco Mellers, and this follows Cleo and Frank, an age gap relationship. They meet one night, set in New York City, which is always fun. They end up getting married like 6 to 8 months later. Follows how their marriage, which was very much an impulse marriage, affects all of those around them. A lot of these characters are very selfish and weird and toxic. It talks a lot about you can kind of lose an identity when you're in a certain type of relationship. I really loved Cleo. I thought that she was a very strong main character. Side characters in this made the book to me. It isn't like a fluffy romance. It's a literary fiction, so it's going to make you think about the topics it presents, and those topics are relationships, love and codependency, addictions, infidelity, things like that. And it's a really big character study of all the characters that are in this book, and I really enjoyed it. In my literary fiction era, started with this one. 4.5, yes, that tracks. Ending this video with a bang. Boy Parts by Eliza Clark. I finally got my hands on this and decided to read it, and let me tell you, I went into this book thinking that it was a literary fiction, that it was gonna be like Cleopatra and Frankenstein. It was gonna super analyze relationships on a micro level between a couple of different people. No, this book is a horror. This book is gore horror. Did I have any idea? Absolutely not. And I went into it thinking, oh, I'm just gonna learn about these characters. Ended up finishing this book needing a lobotomy and a hug and Tums because I was nauseated. So let's go over what this book is about. Exiled from the art world and on sabbatical from her dead-end bar job, Irina obsessively takes explicit photographs of average-looking men she persuades to model for her, scouted from the streets of Newcastle. But her talent has not gone unnoticed, and Irina is invited to display her work at a fashionable London gallery. It is a chance to revive her career and escape from the rut of drugs, alcohol, and extreme cinema she's fallen into. Yet the news instead triggers a self-destructive tailspin, centered around Irina's consuming relationship with her best friend and a shy young man from her local supermarket who has attracted her attention. It touches on consent. It's conversations about consent, and this woman is unhinged. Irina is unhinged, and so it does it in a very satirical way, but it's also horror, so there's some things that happen. Please check the expansive list of trigger warnings for this book. One part that made me nauseous and I had to take Tums. There was one part that made me so uncomfortable. I just went like deadpan, like didn't know how to react to it. And I think a lot of my reaction to this book was because I went into it not knowing it was a horror. So please know that. Please, do I need to say it again? This book is a horror. I say that and I have not stopped thinking about this book. The downward spiral that this character goes on is absolutely like unhinged woman, chaos, revenge, crazy. It's wild. It's wild, and that's all I'm gonna say. I think I ended up giving it a 3.75 or a 4-star, kind of in that area. So that is it. That is all 16 books I read in the months of April and May. I feel like my reading taste has kind of changed, like I said, along with the seasons, and I think I'm going to continue on this trajectory of reading literary fiction and romance. I have some videos planned in that regard. Please take care of yourself wherever you are in the world. I hope to see you in the next one as well, and have a great rest of your day. Bye.